George King, a little bio here. George King is said to live in the past, but likes it that way. His home in Franklin, Connecticut was built in 1750. During his 22 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, he sailed on the Burke Eagle. We weren't sure. This was his second square rigger. His first car, as a sophomore in high school, was a Model T Ford. For years, he worked at Mystic Seaport as a chief engineer on 1909 steamboat Sabino. Today, he joins us with his oldest car. Sit back, relax, and enjoy his presentation, and hold the car for George. And this is Bill Metz, one of my co-researchers.
Before we get started, I gotta say something. And that's how nice it is to be here. I was born in Newton. All right, I live in Newton Corner. And it's nice to be back in an area where I could say I went to the Watertown Hospital and parked at the fire department garage. I haven't been able to do that for years, say that. When I was fire chief out in New York State, there was a guy in the fire department by the name of Gary Parker. And he told me, he wanted to know why I was insulting him, changing his name, making fun of his name, Parker. Well, it's Parker. Well, no, it's Parker. So I changed the way I talk, but it's nice to be back here and hearing it again, so thank you. Before I start with the narration, I'd like to introduce some of how the whole thing really happens. This has been a 3-year project, working virtually every day on it. Just after I bought this, I fell off a ladder 12 feet onto a concrete floor, and it wasn't good. I was in the hospital. I was in 3 hospitals. I only remember one. But when I was in the hospital, my friends would come over and visit me. And what we would do is we would talk about how we're going to restore the Orient, what we're going to do with it. So that was an important part of it. Mark Sullivan was who's from Connecticut. He's one of my friends that worked on making me better and on getting this car running. And he introduced me to Frank Bernstein, who's over at Glastonbury. And he is a machinist. And he has an amazing milling machine. I call it the magical, mystical milling machine. It's got a computer on it, and he can make stuff that's just absolutely amazing. And also Jason O'Brien, who is a collector of all kinds of neat antique car stuff, which is currently on this car right here. He has given me all the little electrical fasteners to put on it and all that. My friend Jeff Klinger here from Sudbury, Mass, who was on a Model T project that we did some time on that. We took it to France, okay? So he also, on this car, he's part of the story of the battery, which I know I have to tell you, how the battery works.
Yes.
Okay. So these are my special friends who have joined us today, and I welcome them and all my new friends also. Thank you very much for coming. When you find a car, you should either buy it or not buy it, and on a rare occasion, you have to buy it. This car was one that I had to buy. This car was built right here in Waltham by Charles Metz, down at the Orient, building Orient cars, down at the Waltham Manufacturing Company. One of his employees was my grandfather, of course, another George King. And this is George. He lived on Gill Court, which is now Yetton Terrace, is off Pine Street and Newton Street in Waltham. And his car is one of the, I mean, his home is one of the two that still exist. On September 23, 1898, the issue of the Boston Globe reports that George King was on a one-mile novice bicycle class at a competition being held in Hudson, Mass, and he was on the Orient team. When he gets his name on the census in 1900, where it says your job, he doesn't put down a bookkeeper or being a machinist or being in the police department or anything. He puts down that he worked for the Orient Bicycle Company. So at the age of 20, he was very excited about that. During the same time that my grandfather worked for Orient, Charles Metz also hired a very fast bicyclist by the name of Albert Champion, otherwise pronounced as Albert Champion. He's the fellow that invented the Champion spark plug and also the AC spark plug. And he was hired by Metz, and in the new book that Peter Nye has written, The Fast Times of Albert Champion, he states that the Frenchman was hired to, quote, race for him and to aid in his plan to shift to manufacturing autos. Champion had worked for Didion Bouton in France and had even brought some with him over to Metz. This photo is a 1900 runabout with Albert Champion at the tiller. The passenger does not appear to be Metz. Can anybody, we have a lot of people here today that know a lot about Metz. Anybody here know who that is in the photo with him? Because he appears in a couple of photos with Champion. All right, and one of the reasons, you can often find a photo of Albert Champion because he liked to wear the chauffeur's hat. If you look at this photo, you can see he's got the goggles up there. And on this photo over here, which you'll see in a minute on the screen, he's also wearing this. So, of course, I figured if a gentleman of the period used to look like that, so should I.
Is that the hat from the photograph?
Does it help? Now this is an ad for the 1901 car, but it's using a photograph of the 1900. Now we're not going to get into great details because we have other people that have things to say today, and I want to make sure they do because I want to listen to them. But on the 1900 car, the front the spring right here is located under the body, like a carriage would be. It had Ackerman steering, but the spring was under it, so it was only pivoting in a small piece of wood under the car. This car went to New York City for the first auto show there in 1900, and there's no record of it being won. There's a lot of cars that were on there, there's movies of them, there's pictures of them, there's a lot of articles about them, nothing said about this. I think what happened to the 1900 is that they broke it. When you make a sharp right turn with only 2 bolts in the center of the car, snap. And the other thing that makes me think that was the problem was because in 1901, which is this guy, they changed the design. The spring on the 1900 was only that wide. Look how far it goes here. And there is also a piece of steel under it here that is supported by the sill of the body to make it a lot more stable. I'm actually more pleased that I have an 01 than having a 1900. This photo here, this is the one that shows Albert Champion dressed properly for the occasion. And the lady riding in the car is Elizabeth Metz, the wife of the owner. Now in 1902, they made another change, which is, there's a couple of changes, since I can tell the two. You see this support going from axle to axle? Just like the neighboring Stanley steamers had. They put that in there, which makes it a lot stronger and keeps the alignment of the axles a lot better. The other thing you'll notice here is that this, there's a shaft on the side right here, and that controls the transmission for forward or reverse, whereas in 1900 and 1901 it was up on top. You'll see it on this car with that crank up on top. Now this is a picture of a 1902 car in South Paris, Maine, at the Bear Collection up there. And this is interesting because they bought this car in the 1970s from a museum in Princeton, Massachusetts. And on the car in Princeton, it had painted on the side 1901 Orient. So everybody knew it was a 1901 Orient when it was there, and it was purchased as a 1901 Orient, and it's been displayed in Maine for years as a 1901 Orient. Fortunately, they were quite tolerant when I explained to them why it was a 1902 and provided them with all the photo documentation that shows the difference. This is the only 02 that I know of. In 1900, they built one car, the one they took to to Madison Square Garden. In 1901, I believe they only made two cars. This one in the photograph with Mrs. Metz and Mr. Champion being the first car. Because if you look at the trees, it's springtime, it's early in the year, and this is the new photo of the new vehicle. And I think this was the second one, and I think this was being prepared for Madison Square Garden. What makes it different is that this car has the fancy seat. This has the fabric seat, not the leather seat. And this car also has a nickel-plated engine. This is a Aster engine made in France. And I think this car well, they just put lipstick on the pig, you know what I mean? They just tried to make it look real fancy. Metz was well known for his ability in nickel plating for making the bicycles too. So I think there were only two cars built in 01 that were not produced. But by 1902, they produced 50 cars. So that was heading in the right direction. This is an ad for a 1903 Orient. Now, what's kind of fun is in the I think it's 1905, 04 or 05, they run this ad in their catalog, and it says, our last water-cooled car, 1901. 1903 ad, radiator. Here's an ad that shows both cars, the new runabout and the old water cooler. Now this is I think this is the 1903 catalog cover. And you remember Ralph Nader? 1965, he wrote Unsafe at Any Speed. Well, if he'd been around in 1903, I think he would have written Unsafe Sitting Still. Why would you put your little girl out on the front seat of this thing? You know what's going to happen next. So then there's a car finds me. That's my story with Metz Cars. They find me. And this is a very good friend of mine, Craig Rayner down in Long Island. He lives down at, in Southampton. Now, you remember Clark, the guy that wrote the book, Encyclopedia of American Automobiles? Okay, well, he had a museum down there in Southampton. It was amazing. And I believe that this car was given to him or purchased by him, but as he often did, he moved it on. And he sold this to a gentleman whose son I bought it from. We'll talk about them in a little bit more. But Craig found it, and this is where it had been sitting for 40 years. The good news is that he put 2x8 floorboards in this barn, this building. So even though it's nice and wet living on an island, it never rusted everything out and rotted it coming up from the bottom. So there it was. That's this car. First time I saw it. I did buy it. Craig and Lance, who's the gentleman, Lance is on the right, he's the gentleman who owned it. And that was so full of junk. We just took, I took things up and put two tarps on, made two piles. Stuff that looked like it was Orient and stuff that definitely wasn't. This is the original seat that was on the car. You can notice that there's not much wear on it. This car had very little mileage. It wasn't a great success, and it didn't live very long. Now, before I left there, I used a tool that I recommend for all of you that like to go on dinosaur hunts like this, the metal detector, to see what else is underneath the leaves. And it's worth renting one from the hardware store if you don't have one. So there's what it looked like. That's the chassis sitting in the truck, and there's the whole car sitting in there. This is over at Craig's house, and then we moved it home to Connecticut. Yeah, it didn't look quite the same. Now, whenever you have a car that you're going to restore, you draw a line in the sand. How are you going to restore it? What is the important moment in the history of that car's life that you want to replicate? Do you want it to look like a car coming out of the stand, out of the showroom for the first time, perfectly shined, very precise? Or do you want it to be at an important day in its life? A good example is a car at the Henry Ford Museum. There's a race car up there, 999 or one of them, and it has a big copper tank on the back. And there's a dent in the copper tank somebody put in it, pushing it, and a restorer would say, oh, well, we can back that out of there, that's no big thing. But the important moment in the history of that car is when it won the race. There's photographs of it before the race, and there's no dent in the tank. After the race, they were pushing it off the field, they got the dent in the tank. So that is important to keep there as the moment in history that you're going to restore that car for. So what I want to talk about now is my line in the sand. What did I want to do with restoring this? Well, I wanted to drive it. So that was one of my line in the sand. And another thing is I knew it didn't work very well when it came out of the shop. So I wanted to find out why and see what I could do about that. So is that historically accurate 100%? No. Is it sensible? Yes. So that was where I put my line in the sand for the 01 Orient. See that wheel? That is not a genuine wheel from this car. It is not a correct wheel for this. This car had no wheels. So I had to make wheels. And one of my first things in this line in the sand for the wheels is they were originally wooden wheels. Like I said, I want to drive it. Having a wooden bicycle wheel on a car might be a little dangerous. So I decided that I was going to make steel wheels for the car. So first of all, we bought 4 of these Harley Davidson front wheel hubs. And then we turned it down so they were straight, took those pretty shapes off of them. And then I bought the rim on the outside of this is from an early Model T Ford. And I sent the hubs and the wheels out to California and had them put together by a motorcycle guy. And he also had to put a dimple in every one of in the rim where every one of the wires comes through. And it had to be at an angle, and you can certainly see that on here. He did a very good job. So then when I got it back, I took it all apart and sent it out and had it painted at my local auto shop. And there it stands. And what I did when I got it back painted was I brought it up to Massachusetts, down near Worcester, and had a guy that rebuilds sports car wheels for MGs and Bug-Eye Sprites and stuff like that, and I had him put it together. So all in all, I had 4 wheels made for this. They cost me $2,000 more than the car had cost me. But you know what? You need wheels. This is Charlie Gallo. Charlie is one of the 4 top members of the Orient crew, 3 others of them being seated here. And Charlie was a real good, he worked for me when I was restoring antique engines as a living. I owned a company. And he worked for me for 9 years. But he is a collector of antique motorcycles. Now, if you're going to build a 1-cylinder vertical 1900 engine, it's really good to have somebody that has restored antique motorcycles. So this is Charlie. And by the way, this is my dining room in my house. And this is what he's doing. We're putting new bearings in it. We did have Christmas dinner at my house that year, and the car body was sitting in there in the corner, so I figured because it was Christmas and my name is King, I put a Christmas song on it, so it said, "We 3 Kings of Orient." These are 2 of the grandsons helping me restore the body, and this was a very good thing because this body had no bugs in it. There were no bugs that had gone into the wood. This is all original wood.
Wow.
And it didn't have bugs in it because it was primed with white lead. Yay! Charlie Metz. Okay. So we had to straighten all that off. That's what it looked like. And then we started painting it. I guarantee that enamel paint today is not the same as it was back then. I needed to know what kind of paint was used on the car. I found a drawing of the Metz plant where they were making these cars that was for the insurance company, and it labeled every room and what was in it, and it says enamel paint room. So I knew it wasn't, well, it certainly wasn't latex, but it wasn't lacquer. It was enamel, so that was good. So I bought enamel paint, and I went through far more than what you should have to do to brush paint on a wooden body. I used the paint and I added penetrol to it, which is something you use to make the marks blend together, and I also had to put thinner in it to get it to the right consistency. And after a very long time, we got that done. This picture here, one grandson in the red shirt is doing the painting, and his older brother is using a heat gun to make the paint flow, to level out. And after we got done with it, and I was satisfied, this is kind of what it looked like. The seat was made of the same stuff, and it had some bad splits in it. But after, having worked at Mystic Seaport for many years, it was kind of nice because you knew how to fix wood pretty well. So I used the same paint, and then I sent it off to a guy down in New York that was kind enough to make the upholstery for me exactly the same. It's like a corduroy fabric, and that was much cheaper than the wheels because it was only $4,000. There is no known cure. So we got to the point putting the body together. Even at the peak of the COVID season, we were out there working. This is Frank here, and this is Charlie, and this is me, and Mark's taking the pictures. Oh, that's pretty much the A-team there. This shows how the car looked with the on the chassis. And you notice this, you can see that spring mount that I mentioned, that I told you about. And if you need any information, I know who made the springs, made the steel parts, made the body. This body was in Amesbury, and all that stuff. If you want to for any of your research.
Sure.
Now the engine restoration, that was another story. This is the Astor engine. That's what it looked like the first time I saw it. I brought it home, we started taking it apart. And what I'd like to point out here is something that proved to be one of those lines in the sand project. You get this up on the left, obviously, you see the crankcase, no cylinder on it. And then behind that there is a rod, a shaft that comes out. That's the transmission shaft. And sitting on it are all the transmission parts. So that's sticking out of the engine about that far. What's supporting it? Nothing. So now you have the weight of that transmission on it until you step on the pedal. Then the weight that's like this also moves like this. What does that do to that shaft? Nothing good. This is what happens. This is the broken piston that was in the engine. And with it was a connecting rod that went So this is Frank and his magical, mystical milling machine. Look at the size of that thing. I mean, Frank is 6'6", for Christ's sake, Oh, 5'6". But this has a computer on it. This is just an amazing device. So this is a test piece that he made. This is something that Frank does when he's making parts. It was really neat. Makes them out of wood, and then we can make quick changes. And then he makes the final connecting rod. So what we have sitting in this engine right now, we have a Harley-Davidson piston, because we've had it bored out. And we had to make, and Frank made, the connecting rod. This is, you see the wrist pin in there? It's between two flywheels that's on the inside of the engine. So there's no cap. Also on the engine, we found a water pump. It has, being a water-cooled engine, they didn't just go for the heat moving the water around like Henry did. They had a pump. This pump has a patent date on it of 1899, cast right into it. And Frank made this, rebuilt this. Charlie suggested a material for the pump blade, and Frank made it. And there is the finished pump that is currently on the engine. Now, this is probably the most significant change I made in the engine because of the line in the sand. This is a support that's on the other side of this engine that holds the end of that transmission shaft right in place, and it's anchored to the engine and to the chassis. All right, so you're welcome to come around and take a look at that. This is the timer, and it was French, of course, and it was, who's the chemistry guy? There's a metal called palladium, something like that. Anybody know? Palladium?
Platinum?
Huh? Not platinum. Platinum's a new one, but this is a rarer metal. It's more difficult to find. What is it?
Palladium.
Yeah. Palladium?
Palladium.
Palladium. No, not that. Anyway, it had a. So I had to make my own. I had to make a new ignition point for it. So I go over to Jason.
Brilliant copper?
What's that?
Brilliant copper. Spring reserve. Brilliant copper.
This was like, it was very expensive. It was more expensive than what we're doing. So anyway, the spring was fine. So I went over to Jason and I got some ignition points from him, and I took the points off and put tungsten points in this so it would run. And that bolts onto a piece that's on the front. You can see this stuff on this side of the engine. And this is the aster going back together. Now it has a transmission. Now, of course, we know planetary transmissions, and we know how simple they are. Well, that's wrong. All right, this has sun gear, planet gear, moon gears, ring gear. Two of them were missing. So I have a friend in Connecticut. The newest car he's ever owned is 1909, and he owns a company that makes gears. And I had him make new gears for this. So that's what it looks like, sitting on the frame. And that's a long shaft sticking out of that thing. Now, the first time that we tested it, I said there's a lot of things that we've worked on that we've tried to make better. The piston, the rod, the ignition, and all this. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a new carburetor, a well-known constant lawnmower type carburetor that Frank happened to have, and he made the intake manifold for it. This is the first test run. On the right is Charlie. Behind him is Frank, sitting down with the controls in hand, me and two grandsons. If I was playing this without the projector, you could hear it. How do you like the wheel wiggling there? That'll tell you the engine's running. So that was the first time we tried to run it. You can see this on
YouTube.
what is it? YouTube. And just search for 1901 Orient test run, and it'll be on there. After the run, we worked on the original carburetor thing. When they talk about a piece of gold, this is an original 1901 Metz carburetor that's on here. This This car is during the experimental age of building cars. This carburetor doesn't even have a Venturi in it. Okay? So there's a George King Venturi inside this carburetor, but originally it didn't. And we did get this working. We got the car to run a couple of times with this car, but I still have work to do on it. This is a handle on the top for forward and reverse. Ladies, does that look like anything special to you that you would know? Yes, it's a crank for a grinder, meat grinder. So here we are, we're starting to put the bands on the transmission. And there's the chain. Here's another one. The chain came with the car. Underneath the car when I bought it, there were boxes of stuff that had a tag in them that just said Waltham 1900, which is what this was identified as at the time. And this chain kind of put it over the gears, the sprockets, and it seemed like it fit, but it didn't. The space was right, but the diameter of the roller was too big. It was 5/8, and it needed to be 9/16. So I bought some 1014 steel and tubing rod. Frank cut it with 188 pieces or something like of the right length. Then we reamed it out. Then we heat treated it. Then we put it together and made this one, which is the right size. This is what you call restoration engineering. Now the front chain, there were two chains that came with it for the pump, for the water pump, and the two chains that were with the car were not right. They didn't fit right. And I said to myself, George, what was the guy building? He was building bicycles. So I was able to buy some antique chain from 1900 that Metz used on the Orient bicycles. Boy, does that work well on this car. Now we have these, this was the first day, this was the test day to see if this thing would drive, if we could drive this. And here's the guy in the middle with the beard, Greg, he's one of our crew, and then the young man on the left is a grandson of Mark. And you see Frank there, and you see Jason and his wife Sarah, and Charlie's behind that. And that Mark with the sunglasses on?
I don't think so. I think I took the picture.
No, it's not me. There's somebody who cared. Wish you could hear it. And there's Frank taking a big movie and complaining because I'm going too fast. But this is in operation with the original carburetor that's on it now. For those who want to know about it, I'll explain about that later, after the other speakers get to do their thing. This is 2 days later. This was the second test drive on it. I'm testing brakes on this hill here. Driving my car in my yard. Lance Aldrich is the gentleman I bought it from. It was his father, Ed, who kept it and preserved it, just kind of sitting in a mowing shed. And it produced a car, an early car for George. Now after next presentation, there's going to be a tour over at Gore House, which will be told about. But I will stay here for anybody that wants to get into the fine tuning of the car and the restoration. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome back. Part 2. And this is Bill Metz. And as he'll tell you, no relation to Charles Holmes. That we know of. And Bill Strong. Back in 2008, the Waltham Museum was approached about doing a seminar similar to this. And we got together and we had a good-sized crowd. We did some research, found owners of the cars, and people who were interested in the cars. And we brought them together, and Al Arena at the time was given a lecture, which you can see excerpts of it on YouTube. And then we followed up with, the following April, with a car show of Metz and Orient automobiles and bicycles. And that's where Bill and I met. And Bill was looking for a Metz at the time. And he'll elaborate on that, of course. And as time went on, the three of us got together and we've been doing research on the subject of Waltham transportation for several years now. And Bill will expound on the trip we took in April, to Pennsylvania to find out even more about what happened in Waltham. You have to go to Pennsylvania. So I'll hand it over to Bill.
Thank you, sir.
And Bill Strong.
Very good, very good. Like I said, for my program, I've got things that I'm going to be reading that are on the screen, and it's just easier for me to sit down. So we will get going. The first Metz car that I ever saw was at the Rhinebeck Aerodrome, and my father was really always wanted to be a pilot, so he brought us all down there. At the time, I was into motorcycles and hot cars and drag racing and things like that. And I was just shocked when we were looking at all their cars that they had at the aerodrome, that they had a Metz car sitting there. And I'd never seen one or heard of one or anything like that. But it had that emblem on it, and it matched my last name, and I just thought that was really cool. The car is still there, because I saw it in the earlier mid-'70s. It's still there, and recently a local shop took it into their shop and got it running and moving. And the car itself is labeled as a 1912, but it's really a mixture of whatever they can find. I'm not even sure exactly how to really define it, but it does have a tag on it that says 1912. But the first thing you see is that the radiator on it is a 15 or newer. So it's an odd mix of Metz parts, but I didn't know it back then. And then my first ride in a Metz car was in California. My wife does some business trips, and when she does a business trip, I try and find something that I can do. And the guy that owned this car actually had it up for sale. I had started looking for a car, and his name was Charlie Metz. And I asked him, "You've got to be related to him." He said, "No, I'm not related." He had been here to the museum. He was 84 at the time, and they had a little trouble getting the car going at first. It wouldn't start for him, so he and his son tinkered with it for a while and got it running. And he took me for a ride in the car, and it was a short ride, just up his street and back. He lived in Petaluma, California, and just looking over at him, the look on his face, he was just in complete joy. He was really enjoying himself, and that made it great for me because, well, it didn't make it great for me because I didn't end up with the car, but I just enjoyed watching him. You know, he was having a ball. So those are the two first vehicles that got me going. And in 2009, I found Alarina and the Waltham Museum. And I bought my touring car. This is my touring car. It's the one that's outside now. I bought that from him in 2009. And he didn't really have any history for the car. And I did need some spare parts, so I began looking for other cars. It's a disease. I actually, as I was looking online, and back in 2009, you were actually looking for stuff. It wouldn't jump out at you like it does now. If you Google Metz cars now, there's a lot of stuff that comes up. Where back in 2009, there wasn't that much that came up. But whenever I found a car, I would write down any information that I could on it, and I've been keeping an Excel spreadsheet on it. And so I have a list of cars from 2009 on. And then I heard about the Tucker list. And the Tucker list was Franklin Tucker wrote a three-segment article on Metz cars and did an unbelievable amount of research, which when he did all of his research material, when he passed away, he left with the Antique Auto Club of America library. And that's where Greg and I went down this spring to look at the information that he had. And before we did that, the places I would look were obviously with Google. Google now has Google Books, which they've digitized a whole bunch of different stuff that you can look up. And I've got my books that I've read in the past. One is the Automobile Quarterly, and the article in that is one piece at a time. That's from 1994, which is a really good article. Then Franklin Tucker stuff. And like I say, with Google, what I decided to do is to try and find old magazines like Motor Age and Horse's Carriage and stuff like that had references to Metz in them. And just more and more stuff is popping up as time goes by. And I started taking the folder, and the black folder is the folder that I started with to just, as I found stuff, I would just print it, and it might become two folders. It's getting too thick. But this is the ACA library that Greg and I went to, and we found that the information that Franklin Tucker had collected, some of it I'd seen before, a large amount of it I hadn't seen before. And we gave ourselves 2 days thinking, we'll do a day at the library, then we'll go to the museum. And by the end of the second day, we were still scrambling to try and get through all of the material that was there. And we actually didn't get through all of it. There was another whole box of Marsh Metz motorcycle stuff that we opened, said, wow, that looks great, and closed and had to go. But it's really amazing the stuff that they had. And in here I wrote down that if you start looking in Google for one thing, invariably you find 3 or 4 others. And a friend of mine calls a computer a time machine, because when you start looking at the computer, 4 hours goes by and you have no idea where it went. But enough about me and Greg. Charles Herman Metz was born on October 17th, 1863 in Utica, New York. His father, Charles Wilhelm Metz, was born in Germany, and he was a carpenter. Charles Wilhelm was actually married 3 different times, and his second wife was Charles Metz's mother, and her name was Matilda Augusta Marianne Geneitz Metz. I got through it. I didn't think I'd be able to do it. I practiced. Charles was schooled through 6th grade, and I'd imagine he also picked up plenty of carpentry skills from his father. Utica was a manufacturing town, and it's about an hour further west from where I live. And I'm not surprised that Charlie went into manufacturing, because that's where he grew up. He was first involved with bicycles early on. In 1883, he was an agent for Columbia Bicycles at 46 Genesee Street in Utica. And in 1884, he started a bicycle business that not only sold bicycles and tricycles, but also dealt in men's clothing and merchandise. So it's kind of an odd mixture of things that he was into. The building on Genesee Street no longer exists. It has an arterial that was put in over it. But he had that business until 1888. And during that time, he won the 1885 New York State High Wheel Championship. And he also did a 1-mile dash that he won on July 13th of 1887. And during that time period, he began making bicycle attachments and was a member of the Fort Schuyler Wheelmen, where he went from being a captain to being the president of the club. So he was always into stuff and leading through. And I haven't found the date that he got married. I don't know what his anniversary is, but he was married to Elizabeth Humphrey Metz, who was actually featured in a lot of their advertisements. And they had a son. Their first son was Edwin Humphrey Metz, and he was born in Utica in January of 1888. And in 1889, Charles moved himself and his young family to Needham, Massachusetts, and became a designer at the Union Cycle Company in Highlandville, Massachusetts, which is now called Newton Highlands. He made a lot of improvements on existing designs, and he also did his own designs and had at least 22 patents. He's credited with the left-hand threaded pedal on a bicycle, because originally they were through-bolted, and as you rode the bicycle, the threads would back off on the left-hand pedal and get real wobbly. So he said, well, pretty easy, he put left-handed threads on there, and it took care of that problem. He also, another thing that he's credited for is building bicycles as light as possible, which his racing weight means slow, so you gotta build things light. I'll either call him Metz, CH, or Charlie. I slip up now, but CH wanted to start his own business, and on October 30th of 1893, he incorporated the Waltham Manufacturing Company to build bicycles. He named them Orient and built a plant in Crescent Park facing Rumford Avenue. This was to become plant number 1. And Bill saw it burn down.
I was at Burger King. I saw the fire. It was massive fire.
Yeah, it was a fairly large place, and I couldn't imagine what it looked like burning. So, I wish it was still there. There are things that are still there, but that's one of the ones that's missing. Advertising has always been a big part to get your product known. This 1896 Orient ad features Con Baker, who was a well-known bicycle racer. So it's like NASCAR today. You know, it's the same idea. You take a famous person and say, hey, they love Cheerios. You must love Cheerios. So he was doing it back then. Letters were also sent out when people would ask for information. This 1897 letter, well, copy of the letter, talks about dealer agent possibilities, because they were always trying to get people in different areas to sell the product. And the idea there was the more selling agents you have, the more things you sell. So the combination of advertising and sending letters out, and then at events and just whenever the opportunity became available, they also would have buttons to advertise bicycles and the product. And once again, they used well-known racers to get people to say, hey, if he does it, then it's got to be good. I need that product. And then on the, let's see, furthest to the right on the bottom is Harry Elks on his Orient Leader. And just recently, last weekend, they had a Harry Elks memorial ride in Glens Falls, New York. And my wife and I were on the bicycle path, and we're riding along, and I saw a Harry Elks sign. And I was like, that's impossible. What's Harry Elks got to do? Well, Harry Elks lived in Glens Falls, New York, which is just below Lake George. And he actually died at 25, I believe it was. And he's buried in Glens Falls. So this past week, I just stopped by to say hello, and I took some pictures of his marker, which is a very large marker. And on the back side of it, it said the money was donated from friends and fellow riders to make sure that he had a nice marker. So it's a little dirty. I wanted to talk to somebody about that. This picture is of Major Taylor, also on an Orient, and according to the book, which I just recently read, The World's Fastest Man, he was America's first black sports hero. Everybody thinks of, what's his name? Oh, that guy, Jackie Robinson.
Not Jim Thorpe?
And Jim Thorpe, yep. Okay, give you that. I always go to Jackie Robinson, but Jim Thorpe's good. On his bike, if you'll notice, it's kind of difficult to tell, but the front wheel's smaller than the rear wheel to try and get that angle down to so that you're not breaking the wind as much. It's to help reduce your wind resistance. And to reduce wind resistance, one thing that they started to do was pacing. They would to try and break speed records. Instead of having one guy trying to ride around the track, they started to pace. They started out with tandem bicycles, and they figured more is better. This was actually another one of my wife's business trips. We went to Denver, and I went to a museum called it's Forney. I always say Forney. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but I went to the museum they had there. Because they advertised, like I said, I always take a look first. They had a Metz car there. And unfortunately, the Metz car was not on display. It was in their back warehouse. I couldn't talk them into letting me go see the car. But I went through the museum. I had a good friend of mine with me. And I came around the corner and I saw this quad sitting up on the wall. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I just couldn't. And I ran over to it. The first thing I did, the front forks on the Metz bicycles are very distinctive. He actually patented the front fork design. And even though this is heavier because it's a quad, it still had the same type of fork design to it. And also another thing that really pops out on Orient bicycles is the crank gears. And yeah, you can see it pretty well. They're all O's around the gear, and it serves two purposes. Number one, it lightens the sprocket itself. Once again, light is fast, and also O is Orient. So for me, that's two things I look at: is the front fork and the sprockets. And more trips with my wife. The largest pacer built, and I think everybody probably knows about this, is the Orient Ori 10. In this picture, Charles Metz himself is steering, and the bike was used quite a bit. They shipped it across the ocean, and it was used quite a bit to promote Orient. But they did say it was very difficult to steer, and I can only imagine. There was only one built, and supposedly, well, not supposedly, it's at the Ford Museum. I don't know if it's on display or not. But it's not, okay. So they went with pacing to get speed records for bicyclists by blocking the wind more and more and more. And actually there's a picture of, I don't remember the rider's name, but he went behind a train. They put boards down between the tracks, and he was being paced by a train, which I don't think I would do. So they got into the idea of putting engines on pace bicycles, and it first came from France. And Metz heard about it and started building his own pacer pacer tandems. And they would have two people on it. The person in the back would be sitting up as much as possible to form a barrier to the wind as much. And he would be controlling the motor, and the person in the front would be doing the steering. So they're talking to each other, trying to figure out how to get the thing moving, and they're talking to the rider behind them to let them know if something is going wrong or something's happening, because they tried to put the tire of the bicycle almost touching the tire of the pacer so that they were out of the wind as much as possible.
What year was that produced?
This was, this particular one is 1899 is this ad. 1898 is when, I believe, when he first started working on them. He did try, also in Europe and here, Metz did try electrical pacers, but they just weren't reliable enough, and he felt they were too heavy. And he switched over to petroleum, and he also obtained the exclusive rights to import, you can say it much better than me, Dion Motors. Dion. And with that, also the trikes and quad, they called them automobiles at the time. I would call them motorcycles, but tri and quad automobiles, he started building here after he brought a few over with him. Once again, the motors were added to tricycles and quadricycles. And in this picture, out for a ride, on the motorcycle furthest, the quad furthest to the left, Al Champion is driving and Mrs. Metz is riding. And if you look towards the right, Charles Metz is driving a truck, three-wheeler, I'll go with that. And I forget the woman's name that's on the back of his bike, but they were promoting these types of automobiles. In 1898, the first Orient gasoline runabout was a Dion motor used in this prototype model. John Piper is at the tiller driving, and John Piper and George Tinker built a steam car in the corner of the Waltham Manufacturing Company. But the company decided not to go that route, and then Piper and Tinker started their own business building steam cars. I don't have any information on that myself, but I do know that they only lasted a couple of years making steam cars. And then only one electric Orient was built. It was made in February of 1899 and brought to the Madison Square Garden Show. The electric versus petroleum battle, because, let me read this, I'll just go through. The electric versus petroleum battle began to drive a spike between Metz and his major backers, Charles Coffin, who happened to be the president of General Electric, and M.P. Clough, who was the president of Lynn Gas and Electric. So they were trying to promote electric, and Metz said that petroleum was the way to go. And by 1900, the Waltham Manufacturing Company was building bicycles, motorcycles, tricycles, quadricycles, which they called the Auto Go. They had built a Victoriette and a runabout, but electric versus petroleum battle just continued. And that's at some point in 1901, Metz severed up all connections with the Waltham Manufacturing Company, the company that he started, and became a technical editor on the staff with Cycle and Automobile Trade Journal. And he was doing, they had several different people. He was doing motorcycle information. He had, let me find it here. Charles Durrier was doing gasoline vehicles. Charles Metz was doing motorcycles. J.A. Kingman's was doing steam vehicles. And people would write questions in asking about a problem they had or something like that, and it would be published what to do to help fix their vehicle. After he split from Waltham Manufacturing, he became also a motorcycle builder on his own. He developed the Waltham Developmental Company and began to build motorcycles on Whitney Avenue, which is off of Moody Street. Behind what was the P.P. Adams building. There was, back then, I was actually thinking about it last night. Back then, all the roads were dirt, and there was a small avenue behind that store, and that's where he was working on his motorcycles. The the Waltham Manufacturing Company continued to build bicycles and motorcycles. And this 1902 Orient motorcycle is at the Motorcycle Museum and Motorcyclopedia Museum in Newburgh. And this wasn't a trip with my wife. This trip was with my son. He was playing paintball with the West Point cadets, and I went to the Motorcyclopedia Museum, very close by. They also started working, after Metz left, they started working on Motorcars, as we heard earlier today. And they started with the buckboard and other vehicles. And did you want to say anything about the patent?
I don't want to say
buckboard? You don't want to say that? Okay. So after Metz left, they had other people that came in that actually worked on the automobiles that they wanted to build at that time. But you'll notice they're not electric. And actually, Metz became a competitor with Orient because he went into motorcycles also. And I found these two ads in the same magazine, and I just thought it was interesting that Metz was competing basically against himself with two different companies. I just thought that was interesting. But Metz actually introduced innovations like grip controls. And for a while, he held the American speed record for 1 mile at a Staten Island meet. And the blistering pace for 1 mile then was 1 minute, 10 2/5 seconds. And does anybody know why they measured time in fifths of seconds? I was hoping somebody could enlighten me on that. But a lot of the records are in fifths of seconds.
It's on a stopwatch, the pocket watch.
It must have been at that time, in fifths. Anyways, his son Edwin said in a letter to Franklin Tucker that we found that he attempted to continue until he was financially embarrassed. And I'm not sure exactly what he meant by financially embarrassed. I hope it was because he was making so much money he was embarrassed. But in 1905, and I don't think that's the right answer, because in 1905 he affiliated with the American Motor Company, which was the other side of that was the Marsh Brothers. And in actually the first year, 1905, they sold their motorcycles separately, well together, but they kept their own names. In 1905, it was the 1905 Metz and the 1905 Marsh motorcycles. And then starting in 1906, they were sold as Marsh Metz motorcycles. And I just absolutely love Marsh Metz motorcycles. They're just beautiful. And then, like you were saying before, they're just well adorned with nickel and just gorgeous machines. And if anybody has one that they need storage for, I'll put it in my garage for them.
Is that okay, Lynette?
Yes. But Marsh Metz only lasted until 1913. And I don't know exactly how the relationship went after Metz got back into cars. But this is an interior picture and exterior picture of the Marsh Metz building, which was located on Clarendon Street in Boston. And then this is a newspaper article, and I don't expect anybody to read it right now. I tried not to do too much of the small print stuff, but I just found that this was kind of neat. I highlighted that C.H. Metz acquires the Waltham plant. Waltham Manufacturing was doing a lot of stuff, but even with everything that they had going for them, by 1908 they were struggling financially, and the bank asked Metz to step back in. Metz started to work on the Metz plan car idea toward the end of 1908. In this article, it gives a bit of Metz's history, which is that list on the bottom. So when I read this, I said, well, geez, I should do a timeline and see what kind of stuff that I can find. And if you'd like a copy of it, I have about 20 copies of the timeline that I've come up with in the last few years. In 1909, he started the C.H. Metz Company to build plan cars. And plan consisted of 14 boxes of parts that you could buy one box at a time or a couple boxes at a time at $25 per box, and the buyer would assemble the car. The Metz plan car had a 2-cylinder air-cooled motor with ball bearings inside. They came with an aluminum body when he first started. It had right-hand steering, and the control for the transmission was on the right-hand side. The fuel tank was mounted under the hood, and it had a multi-disc setup for the brakes, which is on the rear axle. And the car would come in primer gray color. And then here's a couple pictures of a couple different plan cars. And the one on the left-hand side was at the Waltham, one of the Waltham get-togethers. And the car on the right-hand side, I'm not sure where it is or where it came from, but I copied the picture from the internet. A question I hear a lot, I've had people call me about, is what year is my car? And what I'm going to try and do quickly is kind of go through some of the changes that they made over the years. Metz cars only had the serial number on the motor. They didn't have it on the chassis, so if the motor was changed for some time, for some reason over time, it kind of messed up identifying what year the car actually was. The 1910 plan car, excuse me one second, could actually be purchased either in kit form or fully assembled. They started to fully assemble them later on in the year. They were basically the same as a 1909 car, but with the 2-cylinder air-cooled engine. The wheels, one thing I didn't mention with the 1909s is the wheels had a reversible hub on them, so you could pull a pin, and the 1912 and 1911 that are outside have these hubs on them. You can pull the pin, pull the whole wheel assembly off, reverse it, put it back on, so it changes the tread width. Because back then the roads were all dirt, and there was who knows how many different vehicles, either cars or horse carts, they would get ruts in them, and you could change the width of your car to try and find a smoother ride. 1910 also had the rear disc brake setup, and they tried to save a little bit of money by changing the body from aluminum to steel, and they were painted French gray. And they also had an optional color that year. You could get the car in red. And then this is a brochure, a portion of it, a couple of pages out of it, of the 1910 Metz car, plan car. And the Gore place just recently found some of the gold seals. If you look on the left-hand side, there is a gold seal. Then they found a bunch of the gold seals tucked away in a drawer. Wouldn't give me any. We're going to talk about that. I do have a copy of the whole brochure that Tucker had out in Hershey. So I took pictures of it and made my own copy of it. And then at some point in 1910, the price of each box went from $25 to $27, and the kit price went correspondingly to $378, or you could buy it fully assembled for the $475. And then this is a pair of plan cars, and I only know the woman's first name is Diane. She's down in North Carolina. I told her I would put her picture out there, and she's very happy. I asked her if she'd like to come up. She said it was just too far for her to come, but she's lucky enough to own 2 beautiful Metz cars, plan cars. And then the car on the left is a picture off the internet. I'm not sure where it came from. The picture on the right is Dolph Varner. He was at one of the Metz gatherings that were at the Waltham Museum. And he's from South Carolina. And then in 1911, all the cars were factory built. The picture, no, we're not to there yet. They were now called a runabout instead of a plan car. The only real big change was that they moved the gas tank from underneath the hood to behind the seat. They were all painted originally with Metz gray with black striping. And in the picture, I'm not sure, yes, you can see it. The middle of the left-hand side was a parcel carrier that was available. It was basically, I look at it like it was a 55-gallon drum. They cut out a door, and that was the big option. But by doing that, they made it more of a business vehicle, so you could carry around your product. The white 1911 runabout is out front. That's owned by Dave Adams, who's with us today. The red car is owned by the Prey Achievement Institute, and they are in Bedford, New York. And once again, it wasn't a trip with my wife, but I in my search for cars, I found the Prey Achievement Institute, and the guy was a Volkswagen dealer. He started out, literally, the guy started sweeping floors and ended up owning the dealership. When he passed away, he wanted to show kids that if they put the hard work in, they could do well. And he has a collection of cars. And I'm not positive about the year of this car, although the gas tank is behind the rear seat, but it's not an original gas tank. But I'm going to call it an 11 just to nail it down. But we had a really good day there when we went to visit it. We brought my in-laws down, and he got a ride in a 1947, I think it was, Chrysler convertible, which he had when he was a kid. So it was a great day. It was a great day, and it's a beautiful car. In 1911 was a pretty big year for Charles Metz. The magazine articles point out that the company purchased the Gore place at auction on April 11th, 1911, and they paid $55,800 for it. The Metz Company executive offices were in 2/3 of the east end of the building, and the Metz family themselves occupied the rest of the space. What follows are some pictures that Greg and I came across at the ACA library that had interior pictures of the Metz company when they were using it as office spaces. And then I kind of compared them with newer pictures from a blog called Big Old Houses, just to show what the space looks like, at least in the blog. I'm sure it's different now. But this first picture is a picture from 1912, and you'll notice that the Gore estate, or Gore place, is all painted white. It was at the time that was error correct for them. It had started off just plain brick, and then I'm not sure exactly when it went back to plain brick, but I kind of like the plain brick myself better. And hopefully we can get some pictures of our cars in the back of the building like that this weekend. This area was used as office space, and the newer photo shows it as a billiard room. I've got an earlier floor plan of the Gore place, and it had it shown as a bedroom, the governor's bedroom. I believe this room to be upstairs, so we won't get a chance to see it today. It's on the second floor, but just a little bit different between the two pictures. And then this image here on the left is the Metz Company Board of Directors in 1917. In the right hand, it's showing the same room basically set up as a dining room. In 1805, another floor plan that I have, it was set up as the library. And this room is, I believe, on the first floor, and it's probably my favorite room in the house. It's oval, and it's got windows that overlook the back field. It's really, I fell in love with this room. We'll get a chance to see it if I ever show it. I just like that room a lot, and it's just interesting to see it used as an office instead of what it's used for now. This room is upstairs. I believe there's a first floor and then a second floor. The first floor is quite tall, and in the mezzanine, they call it a mezzanine, which I don't think we'll get to see today. But in the mezzanine, there was servants' quarters and things like that. And this picture on the left, it just really surprised me because it's got kind of a curved ceiling to it. And going through the pictures, I found the curved ceiling. So I think that it's likely that this is the same room. There's one other room that has one less window in it, so I'm not positive, but it's in the same area anyways. And then here, once again, set up as office space, and I don't remember if it was you, Bill, or you, Greg, but somebody, we zoomed in on the calendars to see what year it was. And the calendars were backwards, so we knew because I couldn't figure out where this room was. So once I reversed the image, it made more sense. And in 1805, this was the billiard room as compared to now. And the two pictures that I have, they're standing from opposite corners of the room, so they don't look quite exact, but from the best that I can tell, these are the same room. And then this picture is another picture I really like, and it's all of the office employees on the front terrace of the Gore place. And if anybody knows any of them, please let me know.
What year is that?
That is, once again, 1917. And then this picture is a photo of the Gore Place deer yard. They had a deer yard. And Charles Metz is with his son's wife, Margaret, and his grandson, Edwin Jr. Like I said, 1911 was a big year for Metz. And anything that had a wheel on it or moved or whatever, he wanted to try it. And airplanes came out, as we all know, 1903. And in 1911, he wanted to make the Metz air car so that everybody may fly. And he built at least one. I don't know if he built more than one. But he had an airplane program that actually was the airfield. I found an article that said the airfield was where the Sawtooth building ended up being built. And now the Sawtooth building, unfortunately, is gone, but it's where the BJ's is down there. That's where the airfield was. And once again, like I say, he just was into everything. This Waltham banner for the Metz Aerodrome was on eBay. And it went for much more than I would spend for it, but I just couldn't believe it when I saw it on eBay. It's incredible that something like that still exists. And then I do have the postcard that's underneath it. And on the very bottom, you can't really see it, but it says Metz Aerodrome underneath. And I'm not sure, that must be an artist's rendition. I don't think they were flying around quite like that. And then there was an article in the 1911 Aero magazine that said that great flying was done at the Waltham Metz meet. And they had a music program set up for it, and it was like 50,000 people that came to see this airplane meet. And that's not enough. There's more. 1911, they went and did the Glidden tour. The Glidden tour in 1911 was in October, and it went from October 14th to the 25th, and it went from New York City to Jacksonville, Florida. The Metz team actually competed in 1912 cars because typically they would show the next year's product so that people would become interested in that. The start was in front of the AAA building, which is on 5th Avenue and 41st Street. And what they did is they drove down to the river, to the Hudson River, and they took a ferry across the river to go to the official start, which was at Jersey City. And then this is some pictures of the Metz team. And I said here you can see, but you probably can't. I read that at the beginning of the tour, they had all of the cars set at the narrow setting for the narrow track of 48 inches. And later on, and somewhere along the line, all the later pictures, they're at the wider segment. So they must have found a reason for doing that somewhere through the event. I don't know where these pictures came, where they were taken, but they're very interesting. And then the Metz team was doing very well in the tour, and they were actually carrying a perfect score. A flooded stream in Roanoke, Virginia was to be crossed, and Metz hired local help to cross the stream. And on the wagon, you can see Charles Metz with car number 15. And he's right in the middle of the picture, he's leaning forward. And remember that when they had to cross the Hudson, it was okay to take a ferry. But by using this local team of horses, they were disqualified. So they didn't get any placement in the 1911 Glidden Tour. And also, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, it's not very good on that, but car number 16 was driven by Lawrence Cathcart. And during the tour, he rolled the car twice. And the front fender was wrecked on it, and one of the wheels was broken in half. And they just put another wheel on it and continued on. They banged the fender out best they could and continued on with the tour. But like I say, they were disqualified after crossing the stream in that manner. And then the construction of the River Street plant, which is one of the buildings that's still here. It's a U-Haul building right now. Was announced that they were going to build it in 1911 in an American Machinist article. And the contract was awarded to a W.C. Purdy to build a 3-story building that was 63 feet by 103 feet. The contract was awarded in the spring of 1912. That became plant number 2. In 1912, we'll get back to some cars. In 1912, the car went to a water-cooled 4-cylinder motor, and they called it the Metz 22 because it was 22 horsepower. It was their first 4-cylinder motor, and it still used the multi-rear disc brake, and it also had the 14. One thing that was distinguishable about Metz cars is that they had 14-spoke wheels up until 1912, and the reversible hubs on the wheels. It's 3 o'clock? Okay. Well, I guess we have to, at 3 o'clock, we have to go to the tour.
You can go like 15 minutes, sure, for staff, right?
You sure?
Yes.
All right.
And we'll see upstairs too.
We're going to see upstairs. Oh, excellent.
We have 15 minutes.
So I will go a little bit faster to get through the rest of this. But basically in 1912, the color was now battleship gray with white stripes. So they went from French gray with black to battleship with white. And this ad actually says that the standard color was green. So I'm not sure exactly what the standard color was. And then this is one of the 1912 competitors in the Glidden Tour. And here is the 1912 Metz car that's at the Northeast Classic Car Museum in Norwich, New York. And the green car, which may be the original color, I'm not sure where that car is, but the picture's too pretty to leave out. And then here we have another couple of 1912s, and is this yours? It's not, okay. I wasn't sure whether it was or not. And then in the 1913 Metz had left-hand drive, and instead of the shifter being outside the car on the left, they moved the shifting into the center of the car. And instead of having the 14-spoke wheels on it, they were now 12-spoke wheels. And they went to non-reversible hubs, so the track was not adjustable. And they were painted dark blue with cream wheels. And there's a few of them out there painted that way. In their advertisement, they started to show plant 1, which is in the upper right-hand corner, plant 2 in the lower corner, left corner, and then the Sawtooth building, which I'm not sure if it had been built by the time they did this advertising or not, but they included it in their advertising. The second ad is on the right is from Australia, and Metz was one of the largest, if not the largest, exporter of automobiles. He just did very, very well outside of the country. And then this is a picture of the Gore Street plant, plant number 3, and it's commonly just referred to as the Sawtooth building because of the distinct roof line on it. And if you look on the upper left-hand corner of the picture, you can see the Gore State, Gore Place in the picture. And then Bill found these pictures. This is the Gore Place. You know what year by chance?
It says that, isn't the auction date on it?
Oh, it didn't make the end. But anyways, this is the Gore Place when it was, in later years, put up for lease. And it has a picture of the exterior, which is, I think, from probably the same window as the previous picture. And then the interior of it is empty and quite expansive. And then we get to 1913 Metz Roadsters. The standard colors were dark blue with cream wheels, or they made a special, which was had a few less features on it, and that was painted vermilion. So these two cars are obviously not the original colors, but they're very nice cars. If you notice the back seat on the one on the right, it's just flat, not very comfortable looking. And then we have another 1913 car that is actually out front that Dave Adams also owns. A beautiful car. And then once again in 1913 they did the Glidden tour, and this time they won. In 1913 the tour was from July 11th to the 19th, and they went from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Glacier National Park in Montana. And what they did for this tour is that they had all 3 cars and they stayed together. So if one car had some sort of a mechanical problem, all 6 people could jump on it and get it back running. And they had a couple places where they actually had to do that. And some people say that by winning the Glidden Tour with their cars, it kind of cemented CH's position on friction drive, which is what drives these cars. They don't have a transmission in them with gears. They just have what I call snowblower drive, which is a drive wheel that drives a driven wheel that makes the cars move forward. Some people were trying to get him to get away from it, and I read that he was kind of committed to it after they won. And then this photo is copied from a copy that was in Tucker's articles, and that we found in his collection at the ACA Library. And then 1914 Metz ads featured the Glidden Tour win. After he won the Glidden, every ad that he had for a number of years mentioned the win in the Glidden Tour. There weren't really any major improvements over the 1913 car, but they did change the rear body. They put, what do you call it?
No, they called it a torpedo with that trunk on the back. Okay. It was an option. Okay. You could get it either
way.
Style.
And then these pictures, the left car, I don't know who owns it, but Bill Harper, who's from New Hampshire. He's from New Hampshire. He drove his car down a couple of years ago. And I was just very impressed that he drove it that far. These 2 ads are actually not to this country. I don't know the language, so I can't tell you exactly where they went, but I just found it very interesting that they advertise worldwide. French.
Jim, is that French?
French, and it looks kind of Germanish to me. I'm not sure exactly what it is. going, I know. And then they had a Metz Speedster in 1914. Chip Chandler has one. I didn't have a picture of it, unfortunately, but there's one down at the Garlitz Museum, which I'll show you here. On the left is the red one, and then, excuse me, on the right-hand picture is a trip down into the Grand Canyon on a Metz Speedster. And then they went to what they called the four-door. It didn't have four doors on it. I just believe that it was, it was just towards the front.
F-O-R-E.
That's what
F-O-R-E, right.
front.
And they did not make a chassis change, they just did a body change through the 1914 year. And then here's a picture of a couple of them. And a couple more. The one on the left was at the Metz gathering at the Waltham Museum a couple of times. The one on the right is the one that Charlie Metz owned that I got my first ride in. And just a couple more pictures. The blue one on the right is actually a 22 touring car. And after they came out with the touring car, you could buy a kit to change your Roadster into a touring car, and that must be what happened with that car. Advertisement, a couple of different ads for Metz 25s, which was the 1915 car. Mine is out front. They advertised that the car was so simple to drive that a woman could do it. So my wife made a big copy of that ad. She loved it. And then the car on the left is a car that was sold at Bonham's, and then mine is the one on the right. They also started to do, excuse me, more commercial vehicles, and they did the commercial delivery car that's on the right-hand side, and there was actually just one recently somebody built that was in an auction. I didn't win. My wife didn't mind. And then in 1917, the picture on the left has a Roadster and an Orient buckboard in it. The picture on the right is a 1917 touring car. They had increased the axle sizes from 15, 16, and 17. And they also there was a dip in the front axle on the 12s to 14s. Excuse me, to the 16s. They took that out in 17, so it was a straight axle in the front. And I noticed a difference. I have a 17 also. That I noticed that between my 15 and the 17, they put a stiffener in that went from the back underneath and then back up again to help the chassis. I don't know if they built any of these cars, but they did one with a Victoria top, and they got into heavier duty trucks also. And then in 1918, they didn't build any cars. They did start their advertising for it, but they never actually produced the 1918 cars. The government took over the factory to build airplane parts, and Metz didn't do any cars at all during 1918. In 1919, coming out of the war, they attempted to get back into building cars. They produced the Metz Master 6. That I've not found one anywhere yet. I hope that there's one out there, but I have yet to find one. They were not all built with Metz components. They took various different components from different manufacturers and put them together. And they also did away with the friction drive. And then in 1920, basically the same Master 6. There was a company, Lanza Motors in Washington, D.C., and they've got a few pictures that are out on the internet. These are a couple favorites. I thought they were very nice. And then in 2021, they tried to make not only the touring car, but a sedan. And at that point in time, I'm sure that the writing was, at least in pencil on the wall, they weren't doing very well. And they also started a business called the Colonial Body Company. And they were making four-door bodies for Ford cars. And the Gore place was actually sold in 1921. In 1922, Metz and the bank reconfigured the company to the Waltham Motor Manufacturers Incorporated. This is a picture of a radiator emblem for that car. Really, really gorgeous. This particular one was on eBay and went for an unbelievable amount of money. I couldn't believe how much somebody paid for it, but it really, really interesting. And in 1922, Metz was petitioned into bankruptcy, and in October of 1922, the National Bank took over the Metz company assets, and Metz's run came to an end. This isn't a very good copy, but it's the last rendition of a Metz 1922 Waltham. And then in 1923, the company assets were sold at auction, and Metz actually helped organize the Waltham Country Club, which the Gore place became, and they laid out a golf course. They auctioned the interior pieces to the Metz home at the Gore estate. In 1925, Charles Metz set out for California, and he settled in Glendale, California. He continued to talk with Roscoe Pickens, who was one of his main people when he was here in Waltham, about different ideas about how to make money, what to do. They talked about different cars that they might be able to produce. They talked about actually doing a museum up in Laconia, New Hampshire. But none of that stuff really came to fruition. So he used his woodworking skills and started to make cabinets and Metz refrigerators. And these ads were found by Bill, and I just can't get over that they went into Metz refrigerators. I did refrigeration work for about 15 years, and I was like, well, how much more can we have in common? And then in 1937, he was 73 years old. He passed away, and he rests in the Forest Lawn Cemetery. I happened to get there by my wife taking another business trip. I went and I took a picture. I looked around. I said, it probably doesn't look like it does back in 37, but it was actually very close to where he was working. He had a shop basically across the river.
Where is this?
Glendale, California. It's at the, let me find it here. It's the Forest Lawn Cemetery. And just so you want to know, he's in big company. Michael Jackson's buried there. Liz Taylor's buried there. Marilyn Monroe might be. There's a bunch of famous people that are buried there. So that's basically the end of my presentation. I kind of ran through it a little bit quickly, but that's fine. One thing I did want to mention that his obituary, for somebody that had done so much, and I think impacted so many people, was very, very small. And it just said that he was an inventor of the Metz friction drive automobile. He died here today. He was a native of Utica, New York. He manufactured the Orient bicycle in Waltham, Mass. Later the Metz motorcycle, and finally the Metz automobile. And he came to Southern California 12 years ago. That's all you need to know. But I just think that, I took a picture of the grave marker because, well, that's where the story ends. But it really doesn't, because we're all here still talking about it, and it's 100 years later. So I just think it's very, very interesting. And then my last slide, this is the location of serial numbers for the various different motors that he built. The Orient motorcycle and buckboard motors are the upper left. The planned car location is in the upper right. In the 1912 to 1314, it was stamped into the block on the driver's side. And then finally, thank God, he put brass plates on that you could actually read the numbers. And that's it, we're done. Thank you very much.